Hey everybody, welcome to our first ever episode of Not So Sirius, a weekly discussion between the members of the Everything Astronomy cast, where we talk about anything and everything science related. My name is Tommy, and I'm going to be joined today with my friends Joe, Michael, and Sam, and today we're actually going to discuss why we decided to create the Everything Astronomy podcast. That being said, please let us know if there's any science related questions or any topics that you'd like to hear us discuss in a future episode of Not So Sirius. You can leave those down in the link below. We'll have that put in there, as well as the YouTube comments, and we'll be more than happy to answer those for you in future episodes and Not So Serious. Otherwise, we hope you enjoy the first ever episode.
All right. So how did we all meet each other at Michigan? It was, I can't do this serious thing.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Wait, guys.
Let's just get into it. Like, I think personally, like, I met all of you guys later than all of you guys met each other. Because I'm pretty sure you guys all met each other in Physics 160, right?
All right.
Like,
No, I met
first
Joe
semester.
in Physics 160, but like.
Well, like you guys all
talked to
like
him.
kind of met each other at Physics 160 because I met all of you guys later. Like I think
Right.
Joe was the first person I met, but I met Michael and Tommy a lot later, or at least I got closer to them a lot later. Joe was probably like the first person that I got closer to.
I believe
In this group.
Tommy, Michael, and I took Physics 160 with
Yes.
Brad Orn in the fall semester of our freshman year.
Yes.
And
Right.
I'd always seen Tommy. I'd always noticed Tommy because he was always wearing that silly blue cap in class every single time.
Like the
4
what?
times a week.
This is snapback that he puts on like backwards.
Yeah, that one, the Drummond Island one. And so I'd always known Tommy as the Drummond Island cap guy. And Michael used to wear a bright white backpack with gold stripes from his cross country days as
from the
a
track race,
champion runner in high school. And so Michael was always very visible. But however, I don't believe we'd ever met or talked to each other until the four of us then took Astro 201 Introduction to Astrophysics in the winter semester of our freshman year.
With Kahan Gultekin.
Kahan Gultekin.
Yeah.
I think for the first couple of days, I sat up front, and then one day, like some girl like took my seat. I don't know exactly how the conversation started. I don't know if we were bored or couldn't read the board from way back in the back of the classroom, but yeah, I remember Joe coming in with his pink water bottle, his pink pants.
Yeah. Joe, you would always slam that water bottle on the desk.
I think Joe. I think
this one.
No, I don't know because I like Tom. I really don't remember how I met Tom. Like
I don't remember, dude.
I don't
only remember like getting to know Michael and Joe a lot more because Joe was like the first person I met. First day of Astro 201, he sat down next to me, and this dude opens his mouth and is talking in this English accent. As soon as he started talking, I was like, okay, like I didn't expect that one.
Right.
And he's like, so like, do you think this class is gonna be interesting? Like, I think we're gonna look. I was like, oh yeah, dude. And then like class started, and then when like Gultekin was like talking, right? He's like a professor's going through and like talking, and then Joe's like side commenting the entire time. He's like, oh yeah, like this means that or whatever. Like like, oh, I wonder if he's gonna talk about like this kind of phenomenon. I'm just sitting there,
already
like,
talking about black holes. And
I'm like, I don't know, what like he's talking about, dude. Like, don't look at me. Like, I felt
you should have seen him in 160.
I felt so stupid in that class sitting next to him because I was like, man, this kid's so smart. Like, he already knows this class. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, in 160, Joe would always raise his hands like, professor, like, don't you have to do the double integral? And I was still in Calc 1. I was like, oh boy, dude. And then I remember I was walking through the diag, and then I saw Joe, and I was like, oh, it's a British kid. And then he was speaking full French, and I'm like, you know what? Of course, man. Like, you know.
I don't remember that. All I remember is Michael always brought coffee, and then he would just randomly have coffee beans like next to his desk in 201.
Yes.
You brought coffee beans at the 201?
Where he brought like a bag of coffee beans, and they were just sitting next to his bag in class.
That was one day of the entire semester.
Exactly, and then like I remember it was
Starbucks and bought like a pound of ground coffee.
Yeah, Alex or I think it was Alex would always ask like, so Michael, like, do you enjoy a cup of coffee today? And then you like always respond, and then I just remember like that was like my first.
I think that was a running joke or something every class.
Yeah, it was a constant joke, and then yeah. Well, Tom, I don't remember Tom. honestly.
I
don't remember how I met
One day.
Tom because I distinctly remember meeting Sam the first day because I remember Sam had blonde or silver hair back then.
I had terrible hair. Oh,
And-
I bleached my hair over the winter. Oh, and then I toned it. It was not
And
good.
Sam was from Oregon, and he was the first person who I'd ever met was from Oregon. So that was very interesting. And then Michael, I think I talked to fairly naturally. And Tommy, I have no idea. I remember doing
I really have no idea.
very first Astro 201 homework with Tommy's roommate Gabe.
Oh, maybe that's how Tom came into the picture. As I know we all got closer through homeworks, but I just don't remember Tom being there.
And then wait, who was in whose lunch section?
There's like a time jump in my brain where we get to a certain point where it's just like halfway through the semester where Tom is just there and we're doing all our homeworks together.
Right. It's like I remember sitting the first day of class. I sat in the back because I was like tired or whatever. And then the next thing I can remember is like I was sitting in the back playing games on my phone because I was bored in class, and you guys were just looking at me, grilling me the entire time. And that's basically the extent of how I remember how I met all y'all.
It might have been through lab as well, though.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we have 201 lab?
Yeah, because I think Kelly and Ava were in our lab together. And we all
Tommy,
started
that's
Tommy
right.
collapsed.
Hey, chill.
Tommy, you collapsed in our lab.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know. I did not know. I had become friends with Tommy.
I hate this story, man.
But I became friends with Tommy subsequently, but I still didn't know that Tommy was the kid who collapsed.
Yeah, I
You only found out like
knew him that
last
well. I didn't know him that well at that point.
And I remember, so the Astro Lab was something at 10 or 11 p.m. on the fourth floor of this building where there's really nobody.
Yeah.
I think it was like 9 to
Tommy
11,
just gets up in a dark room, stands up, and just falls on the floor. And everyone just had no idea what to do. That was a panicky
Bro,
moment.
I feel bad.
I think the only thing I have maybe from first meeting Tom is that he was the other kid that lived in East Quad with me. I think that was.
Oh, that's right. You live in East Quad.
Talking to him about. Yeah, because we always be like, what floor do you live in? I would say the same thing, like fourth floor. I forget what side I was. I always say my whole area, and then I forget what mine was. I was fourth on the front side. It was but we would always compare rooms and be like, we talk about that. That was the only thing I remember talking to him about.
Yeah. But
so that was fresh.
You will also recall that I don't think we didn't know each other so well back in Astro 201 because the homeworks were all pretty short.
Right.
And they were not so hard, which meant that we didn't spend a lot of time on them and we didn't procrastinate that much. But then we all took Physics 360 Honors Physics 3 together in the first semester of our sophomore year. And that was a lot harder. And so we all spent a lot more time working on the problem sets together.
Right.
And
like shout out to Professor Henriette, but those homeworks were long.
Yeah, and that's when we all learned how to procrastinate together and how to have a very interesting time.
I don't even remember that either because.
Really?
I remember so much. No, I didn't know we had our homework last semester. No, I don't know, but like I think there were actually a few homeworks in 201 that were like pretty hard. That took a while.
We had in like 201 we had a set schedule. Like every Wednesday we'd meet, and the homework was on Friday. And then towards the end of the semester, we kind of got off that schedule, and like everyone was like working on their own for the homework.
It's not even that.
Some of the fall for 360, like we didn't have like that set group. We kind of like worked on it all on our own. And then we got together and then like went over like whatever tricky questions we may have had, stuff like that.
It wasn't even that for 360 either. I just remember in 201, like this is before we all grouped together to start meeting together. I remember like I had nobody's number except for Joe's, I think.
Yeah,
I remember there was that one homework where we had to do. I think it was a Saha equation, whatever it was.
That was one of the first homework.
There was that one limit that I just couldn't solve. And so I remember I couldn't solve it. I was like, I don't is my brain not working or something? Like I just remember I couldn't solve it. And so I texted Joe at like 11 p.m. and I was like, Joe, like I think I texted him at night or whatever, like expecting to get a response from the morning, like, Joe, I can't figure out this homework. Like, do you want to meet up and just go over it? And I think that's how we started working on the homework together.
Yeah.
And then I think you started talking to other people in the class, and then that's how like Kelly, like Ava, like Alex, and we all got together and we all started working together. Because like some of those homeworks are pretty like there are some random problems there. We're just like, what are we supposed to do with this?
Right.
Like, but no, yeah. I think I don't know. So I think once we hit Physics 360, like I think we were all pretty close at that point. I feel like we're all pretty close at that
felt
point.
like a whirlwind.
At least the four of us.
The entirety of freshman year felt like a bit of a whirlwind anyways.
That's true.
Looking back, I was so comparatively disorganized with my work, and I mean just basic human being things that I wasn't doing well that now I do so much better. But I mean that I suppose that's just experience.
Right.
But
I think that's just normal college.
The other thing is that which I think brings us on nicely about why we wanted to start this podcast.
It's true. Time-wise, it was the fall taking Physics 360 together. But originally, I think it was just Joe, Tommy, and myself without Sam. I don't know who brought up the idea, but we wanted to come up with a group research project, something that we could do with a couple professors between the four of us.
Yeah.
So I think we met at the library on a Friday after class.
Yeah.
I think it was in the
basement.
Astro Lounge. And Michael, you talked about wanting to, because we were all doing independent research at this point, but then we talked about wanting to do like research together. And I think Michael was like, yeah, let's make like a database for some astronomical stuff. And I think it was Sam who was like, what if we just made a podcast?
No, it was Michael. I think we all were wondering what we could do, but then we all realized that like professors already do their own, like we can't do our own individual project because we're going to have a professor overseeing. So it won't be that unique if people look at our resume, and we wanted to kind of stick out. And then Michael had the idea of doing it. No, it was Joe, Michael, just Joe, you and me, Michael, that met in the library.
Okay.
Yeah, we met first,
right.
And then the idea of a podcast came up, and then we checked with Tom about it. And
I distinctly remember that I initially, when we were talking about doing a research project together, I wanted to work on some kind of database scraping system.
Yeah.
But then there were so many already.
Also, at that point, Joe, you weren't working with Vanessa, right?
No, I was not. And I mean, I wanted to do a serious research project, which back then seemed like a very fun idea, but probably was not such a good idea.
Right.
And
it's
then
idealistic or realistic, maybe back then.
But Michael
once you get into it.
Michael had the idea of doing some kind of curated website where we could put content that's kind of level appropriate for all sorts of different people.
Yeah,
which
I think
doesn't really exist yet. And that's how we decided to then do a podcast.
Yeah, because we spent the entire afternoon after class talking about what research projects we could do that are available on campus because of all the professors and research scientists on campus. And then it was like throughout that discussion of whether it be an hour and a half that I realized there's so many professors and so many opportunities and like interesting stories behind them that why don't we just like share those stories somehow? And that's kind of how we developed the idea of the podcast for the science channel.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd always been interested in trying to tackle how people get into sciences, because I distinctly felt as I was sort of in high school that there wasn't anything that out there that felt appropriate for sort of my level, because as a kid I'd write science books and astronomy books and things like that, and I kind of read the web and I knew basic science stuff. And then as I started becoming slightly more interested in more rigorous science, there wasn't any books or any at least I can find any books or any websites or things like that kind of tackle the middle ground science level. So with basic math, but not too much. And that goes beyond a kid's book, but that's not yet into college level books. And that was something that I'd always been in. The kind of high school student experience was always something I was interested in talking about. And talking about with other people and trying to share what I'd been through and kind of some of the solutions I thought of.
Yeah. One thing I always thought about is, like, compared to all the subjects, for the most part, everyone at some level is interested in astronomy. So, like, working at the planetarium, you'd have kids, adults, or older people always come in, always asking the most interesting questions. And so, like, I think already we knew, like, starting a podcast, that there'd definitely be the interest there for people, because people would always be asking, oh, have you heard about this professor on campus? Even though they're just, someone that lives in the city of Ann Arbor. But they had, like, read something in the newspaper about some research and they would ask me about it.
And I mean, it is clearly a trend. And I don't know if it's an increasing or a decreasing trend, but it is a fact of the world that nearly everyone has some kind of interest in science at some point. But the budding interest it's very hard to expand on the budding interest because there's all sorts of barriers that exist out there.
Right.
And so many people's peaked interest in science never gets developed into anything and just ends up falling, because everyone has some kind of attraction to science, whether it's through space or biology or some of the philosophical implications of science. Everyone can be and probably has been interested in science at some level, and it's clear that interest gets dropped at some point. And I think I can identify many reasons why that interest never gets further developed. But doing a podcast is one of the ways that I hope that we could tackle that, at least for some people.
Yeah. I think also
I also think there's the reason why we don't see so much like content in terms of like the high school outside of being in class and stuff like that, like for more, is because there's such a steep learning curve with all the sciences. It's like you hit that like beginning part where it's very steady with like all the introductory books for like kids and stuff like that, and then it's like a huge jump, like an exponential like leap up to like, oh, like this is where the experts study and like this is what they know, and there's like no like middle gap that like helps you bridge those two, where it's like, let's explain this on a basic enough level where you can understand, but keep it advanced enough to the point where it's like it's still really intriguing and still like keeping in like, I guess like
it's more than just like a general overview.
Yeah, it can go because there's an element where like if something is if you experienced enough in something and you've been learning about something for long enough, you can go a lot deeper into how to explain things, which is why oftentimes like it's really hard to understand advanced like papers or like papers that people put up, because like you're not at that level with them. So like especially with the sciences, like I feel like I never got to see, especially with astronomy, I never like really knew much about what goes into astronomy. I think my peak interest that got me into this major was like just thinking about space and what was out there. I didn't really know like all the intricacies of different fields of study. And like, I think for me, what motivated me to get into this podcast or like wanting to do more of this kind of educational content was like giving people the opportunity to like kind of see the field for what it is and see all these sciences for what they are at a basic enough level where they can kind of understand or begin to understand, but still keeping it advanced enough where they want to know more, they can go deeper into like breaking down subjects. I feel like
one of the interesting things is that science has both an extremely rigorous procedure and methodology that allows us to discover facts and truths about the world, and allows us to understand how the world works. But alongside those truths and that fact-finding mission that we've embarked on, there are all of the fantastic implications of science that I think that get many people interested, and certainly interested me and keep on interesting me. And I think everyone has had those conversations thinking about, oh, if bacteria, for example, are tiny compared to humans and bacteria live on humans, what if humans are just bacteria on the galaxy? And I mean, those are very simple questions that have no answer, and I mean, that's just an example of one of the many crazy things.
But I think fundamentally science is just asking questions, and everyone especially as a child, is always asking questions, always being a scientist investigating what's under the rock or splashing in puddles into what's happening. But I think also, as Sam said, there's a steep learning curve between science that we read about, whether it be in science fiction or in middle school and high school, and then that transition to your undergraduate education and beyond that. And so I think we kind of lose that spark, or that we lose that kindling that kind of started our interest in the first place, and asking questions. So I think definitely this podcast, as you said, Sam, kind of highlights why it kind of allows someone to, even though they're standing in front of all this science jargon and all this like stuff that seems really difficult at first, it's kind of allowing them to see over that and seeing, well, research is really interesting, and there's a lot of important fun, interesting aspects about research and science, and not just all the numbers that go along with it and all the math.
Right. And like, I know, at least for my high school experience, like I got blessed, and like math and physics always came pretty easy to me. Like my teacher would tell kids like come to me to answer their questions if she got bored and stuff. But then my school required us to do like senior projects, and mine was to create like a handheld like particle accelerator. So basically I put like electrical paint on a ping pong ball, and then use the generator to make it spin around the bowl. And then I like, they wanted us to present to like a community, so like you'd have a positive impact instead of just like a research project and build something. So I went around to like different classes in my high school, and a lot of people like didn't know what was going on, and was like, oh, I wish I was like this smart to do it. So I guess for me, it's like I want to kind of break down the barriers that like people think are hard sciences aren't actually that hard. Like physics and astronomy, it's just math. Like, and it's like anything that people can do, if you put your mind to it, and like if you really want to do it and you want to follow that interest, as long as you put the effort in, like you're gonna get to that place. So I wanna put out content that's gonna encourage people to not lose interest and not let that Kindle like fizzle out.
That's true.
I also think like with sciences in general, like there is a lot of things that people just don't know, and that they just read and hear about that sound really cool. And so because of that, I feel like there's always been a level of like, you hear a certain scientific word or like a term, and you like get intimidated. Or like honestly, when I tell people that I'm an astronomy major, they're like, oh, you must be really smart. Like that's their first instinct. It's like not like about like what space is about. It's just like, oh, you just must be smart. Like I feel like there's like a level of intimidation that comes with all these science topics and all these like subjects, where it really isn't like, sure, you have to learn a lot of things, but like it's not so different from like doing other majors or doing other like going into other fields.
Yeah, like it's not any harder than like bio or chem or
there's
like history and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stigmas and I feel like stereotypes when people hear, like especially with like physics and astronomy, that like people just automatically associate, oh, you must be a nerd, you must just like you like the stars or whatever, like people automatically associate. I think one thing that we could really do with this podcast is kind of show that it's not all that. That like we as like undergrads in these majors aren't all like that people. Like we are normal people.
Right. Like I'll tell people I'm doing like a physics and astronomy double major to do astrophysics, and one of two options happens. They either don't know what it is, or like, oh, you're a genius, but I'm really not. I'm not an Einstein, like
Or you get that, or you doing astrology. Or you get like, are you doing astrology? Like, do you do
right, like the
usually
no, I don't. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's unknown about these fields that I feel like I want to be able to kind of break down and show that, like, no, this is a very, like, if you want to go into this field, go into this field, because like there's a lot you can learn from it, and it's not all that you think it is from what you hear from media and what you hear from other people in terms of like when they hear it. There's a lot you can get into with a physics and astronomy major.
I always try not to say astrophysics. I say astronomy, but then if she was saying astronomy, is, as you said, Sam, everybody says, oh, astrology. Tell me about my sign.
Exactly. Because when they hear astrophysics, like astronomy plus physics, like those two on their own are already like pretty, like they sound really smart. But when you combine them together, it sounds even smarter to those people. And so like they hear astrophysics and they're like, oh, wow, you must be like, geez, like you must be really smart. Like, wow.
Really? Like I'm just your pretty normal kid,
Yeah, like I'm not that smart. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, if I were smart, I'd be working for like the government, some super secret base already, you know?
Yeah, I could probably be doing another major, and like people would be like, oh, he's whatever. Like, people see that I'm doing astrophysics, they automatically associate that I'm really smart, but I really am not. Like,
right.
You know,
we're just like your normal average people that go to college, you know.
Exactly.
There is a shroud of surrounding math in that, and the applications of it. So any kind of derivative field also suffers from that. But for some reason, I mean, for many reasons, people are afraid of. Many people get turned off by math at some point because they don't get it and they think it's reserved for a certain category of people. And I think the main problem is that math is explained is often explained in schools, and to most people it is just a thing that sits in its own box, and it's an exercise at school more than anything else. And whereas the applications of math are truly incredible. I mean, I think, for example, most people couldn't conceive of why we would need the imaginary numbers. So in the sense that the square root of -1 is equal to I, the imaginary number. Most people, just thinking about that question is just lunacy, in that they can't see the practical purpose of it.
Or they resort just to like, oh, it's imaginary. I want to know that.
And if it's imaginary, therefore it mustn't be real. So why are we thinking about it? But when you learn that your iPhone Zoom could not work and anywhere nearly as well as it works now, if it weren't for imaginary numbers existing, then I think people would be more interested. If we can show, for example, that the only reason why your phone's memory is so good is because people have been putting electricity through materials and seeing what happens. And I mean, I think that's the problem. In schools, people learn about physics and maths, especially, as just being the standalone exercise that doesn't really serve a purpose in the real world. But I think stressing its applications, showing how interesting it can be, would be helpful. And that was actually one of the reasons why another reason of mine is that to start this podcast is that when I started off college, I wasn't actually set at all on being a physics major. I was thinking actually of being a linguistics major. And I think that, and I just happened, looking back retrospectively, I happened to become a physics major nearly by accident, because in my first semester of college, I took a physics and a linguistics class, and the physics class was fantastic, and the linguistics class was pretty boring, and that mostly because of the professors teaching them. And so I was like, okay, I guess physics it is. Let's roll with physics. And it hasn't served me. It served me well, I think. But I became a physics major by accident. And what I was trying to get to is that there's so many interesting fields out there. So I was interested in linguistics mostly because of historical linguistics. So I have always found it fascinating that we've been able to compare languages and work back on language trees and families of languages. And for example, we've been able to reconstruct not only how to read hieroglyphics, but mostly how to pronounce them based on modern languages. And I'd always found that fascinating. And some of the philosophical implications of science, which we can get into a little bit later, I'd always found those interesting. But I was never set on making a career out of it. And I'm still not set on making a career out of it. And so one of my reasons for doing this podcast is that I want to share our experience as students in the undergrad, because most of the time when people get insights into what it is to be a scientist, it comes straight from the top. It comes from Nobel Prize winners, professors, high-level academics. And whilst those people are I mean, they're very learned and great, and it's fantastic to hear their perspective, there's such a small portion of people who study the sciences at an undergrad level. And I think, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, was to share an alternative perspective to being a student of the sciences.
Right.
Yeah, not even that though. Like people just like people don't really hear about the undergrad like science experience. Like sure, like you'll have your share of like, or I guess not really the sciences, but more like in the physics, like that the mathematical side. Like because people will be like, people will hear about like medicine. People who are going to medicine, like biology majors, like
right. Like
I feel
I almost went into pre-med.
Yeah, when you like
a physics course and was like, you know what, whatever, man.
Yeah, because like when you talk about like college majors, when those things get brought up, it's usually like, all right, there's computer science you can go into for like the tech field, engineering. There's medicine, and then there's like business, and then like I feel like somewhere in all of that, like the science gets lost because it's like you expect. I almost feel like today's culture expects scientists to be like to just go straight into engineering.
Right.
Or like those like technical fields where it's strictly applicable instead of like seeing like, oh no, you can still do like like astronomy and physics like on their own and like actually like grow through that way as well. Like you don't have to just go straight into I have to be like a computer scientist or like a computer engineer because of this, you know? Like I feel like there is an element where we lose like that people don't really get to see the how you go through like an undergraduate like astronomy major or like a physics major because like it's just not known. People don't do it. It's like so unknown, and then it's like not relatable when you hear it from like someone who's like 70 or whatever, and you know like has won Nobel like you said, Joe, like won a Nobel Prize, like you know.
Yeah, like I played soccer growing up, so I have like a bad back and bad knees. So I'd go to the chiropractor once a month, right? And I became pretty close with him. He was actually a physics, like he got a degree in physics in his undergrad, and then he went straight at like he counted that as his pre-med. And then went to med school right off his physics and chem degrees. So it's not even like you have to do quantum research and be like a Jimmy Neutron. Like it's so applicable. You can go like I know Joe said he wants to do quantitative analysis for a bank as like an option.
And the interesting thing is that whilst that's an option, I don't even know if I want to do something as technical as that.
Right.
In the sense that at the moment, I really like what I'm doing in physics. I like learning about quantum mechanics. I like learning the math involved and things like that. But on the other hand, and this is something that I found not slightly disappointing, but that I was disappointed by, I suppose, is that scientists are often confined in the box of just being scientists. And when I tell people that I want to sell things, I'm more and more seeing myself potentially going into career as an investment banker because I've realized that I also like pitching things. I like selling things. I like talking to people. I like meeting new people. I like to I like finding solutions to problems that exist in the world. And the thing is that as a scientist, people think that a scientist is only solving one type of problem. And whilst it's true in their studies, there's no reason why a smart, driven young person couldn't succeed from a kind of science track in any other field. I look especially at business because, and I'm not to discredit the work of business schools, but what people learn in business schools, for example, I could learn as well. And I think that's something that I would like. I think would be interesting to discuss further, and that we will be discussing further in our podcast, episodes. That as a scientist, you're not set on one track.
Yeah,
right.
And like in
science
many ways,
gives you a basis to go off to study anything.
Yeah,
else.
you're getting
some people. Even if some people have a leg up on you in that they did a business degree for their undergraduate studies, there's no reason why you can't then go study business and do a master's or something like that.
Exactly.
There's so many options that are open that I think I'd like to share and explore further.
Like at the end of the day, like you're getting trained in a very analytical field at the very least. Like all that math that you're doing as a physics degree, like that's so applicable. Even like you know how you wanted to quantitative and like you were thinking of quantitative analysis at one point. Like there's so many mathematical applications you can take from physics that people will see and will value because they're very valuable skills.
After a 4-year degree, you have a physics major, but more than that, you have a degree in asking the right questions and going about answering those
right.
questions.
Like you have all the, if you participate in research, you know how to like conduct hypotheses and test them out, and pick a goal way down in the line and then work your way to go solving that goal.
Yeah. The only thing, and this is the only thing, about that, and this is something that this is one of the main things that I want to share in this podcast, is that people who are interested in sciences get told a lot of things. So we get told that with the science degree, you have a passport to the world because you've done a lot more thinking and you've learned all of this cool stuff that very few other people know. However, on the flip side, my experience hasn't necessarily reflected that, in that when you start a science degree, you will get told by professors and the science world as well that you are doing more work than people who are doing humanities and business studies and things like that. Right. And that's eminently untrue, in that as someone who's studying physics, I have found that when I talk business with people who study business, they still know a lot more about it than I do, unless I read up and studied that specific field. And so there is some, I think the problem is that as people who are interested in sciences, we get told a lot of things. And in later podcast episodes, I would like to share some of the lies, not necessarily lies, but
I don't think they're necessarily lies either, Joe. I think what you're getting, what I'm trying to say is that you open up a lot of opportunity with a science-based degree, where you're not pigeonholed into having to go. Because if you went into business and try to go into physics afterwards, I think you would find it so difficult because you have to learn from the bottom up. Whereas if you went from physics and you jump to business, sure, on a general knowledge scale, like being in the field, you would lack a lot more than someone who did a business major, because they would know a lot more technical terms. They'd know a lot more about different companies and stuff like that, how things are run. Those are all things I feel like that are very attainable, that over time you can get. Whereas with the physics, it's very rigorous and you have to understand things to a deeper level, where those analytical skills and those things you learn in terms of how do you would go about solving a problem can be strictly applied to the same way something in another field could be approached, on a breadth of knowledge, on a knowledge, simply knowledge-based skill, sure, you might lack because you're not, you might, when you're talking to someone who's a business major, you're not going to know as much because of course that's what they're studying, that's what they're a part of, but it's not something that you can't take the time to if you transitioned into that area could adapt to and learn more and understand better. And also having the backbone of I can solve these problems because I understand how to do these,
That will have to be, I think, the object of an entire podcast.
It could be a different episode.
From us,
right.
Just on,
on we were talking before
the implications of becoming a science major in college.
I think you learn a lot of very, very good analytical and just very you learn a lot more than what the major shows from a physics, from a science perspective, that people don't really know about, because when they think of a science degree, I feel like there are associations and stereotypes that are strictly applied already that kind of might cause people to not want to go into those majors or whatever, and things like this.
Yeah,
which is I think what the point of what we're trying to say was with this subject, I guess.
Yeah. There are stereotypes, but I think having this podcast is great and showing what not the daily life is, but what it's like to be an undergraduate, what to expect, and why the four of us have found the past 2 years and hopefully the next 2 years to be really fun and engaging.
Yeah,
as a physics major, as an astronomy major. And I think also with our podcasts and bringing in these professors who followed all different kinds of tracks, so far with Professor Meyer and Professor Lamone, and hopefully many more to come. But I think they also struggled, or they explained their struggles, and also of not knowing exactly what they want to study. And also, as Joe said, we often think about a scientist in a box and then just strictly being a number cruncher or someone writing all the time and publishing papers. But these professors that we've interviewed so far, professors we've had in classes, they have so many more interests than just the research.
Right, Professor Meyer had an amazing story of how he happened to show up onto astronomy, and that episode should be coming soon. We're just working with him to touch up a few things, but yeah, his story of how he became like an astronomy professor is really inspiring.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of I guess getting back to the main point of why I even got into this subject or this topic was like there's a lot of stereotypes I feel like that are out there about certain majors in science and like just science as like a whole that people have created and have come up over time. And I think what we want to do with this podcast is like provide some relatability for people who are interested possibly in getting into this field, and like B, just like break down some walls, like show what like it kind of really is like to go through this kind of track and like experience these things instead of like just constantly just seeing or just hearing from other people like about like and getting fed this kind of knowledge where it's like, oh no, science is just this. Like people who go into science are like this, like getting like kind of want to get out of that box, basically. I think, which is and like a big point of like why we want to do this podcast.
Yeah,
why,
and I mean, I think to kind of synthesize all of those ideas, it really comes down to when people are when people are in school and they're pondering on their different life options.
Yeah,
I personally get lots of questions from high schoolers that you know are in my younger brother's grade and things like that about what it's like studying science in university, and I've realized, and I didn't have that either when I decided to do that. There's very few honest perspectives on what it's like being a science undergrad, because you get for the most part it's big universities with very renowned with world-class renowned professors who are telling you so many things about what it's like being a science undergrad, and they sound fantastic, and I think we can provide, and I hope to provide, another perspective of not the university with I have no business interest in selling an aspect of science, and whereas universities, professors, departments do. And so and I want to share my perspective and my thoughts and also my interest of science to everyone. Awesome.
Cool.
And so I think I think that's we've opened the door to many more
different topics,
podcast episodes and many more things that we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But in the future, we're planning on still interviewing professors as we've already started doing, in the same style, to hear from their life, their kind of their path from being a student in school to being a professor at a major university. So that's going to keep going. But I also think that getting students, our perspective, and other students, whether they're undergrads like us, different undergrads, for example, and then grad students, and all sorts of different people involved in science, that I think that's where we aim to provide some kind of insight into the world of science. And that's another big thing for me. I want to break down the ivory tower that surrounds science. In the sense that I'm well aware that it exists, and as we talked about, it can be intimidating. Science is also it's not built itself the best reputation. And I want to break down give an insight into that world.
I think there's a lot we're still planning to do. Obviously, the core of this podcast, or this why we created the start of this podcast, was so that we could kind of bring in different academic, like people from the academia field, and kind of showcase them as just regular people, and like just ground everybody a little, like so much of science is put in the fantastical, where people just imagine people's imaginations go crazy. It's like, let's ground all of these things and bring insight into how things work. So we'll continue to do that, and then I think every week we're planning on trying to continue to have these kinds of discussions regardless of the topic. Whatever we find interesting, because we found that as a group of four of us, we tend to go off for a while on like different topics and just talk for a long time.
We started this podcast talking about how we met, and I think one of the reasons, what happened was with us becoming such close friends, is that when we worked on homework together, or we met after class, we would, before the homework started, we would just talk continuously.
Even during the homework, I don't know who you're kidding.
One person would
during the
bring up
homework.
one subject, and then we would go from point A to point E somehow, and it just be like, how do we end up here?
The homework definitely took twice as long as it should have because of us talking. But we thought that having this kind of sub podcast series, Not So Serious, would be a great idea for us to talk not so seriously about these different interesting topics in astronomy research and being an undergraduate
student. We could talk about like our experiences, any cool news that pops up that's science related, just any fun topics that people would like to hear about or we'd like to talk about. So,
and then for everyone listening to the podcast or viewing it on YouTube, definitely in the comments below, or also we have a Google form where you can like give responses. We'd love to hear your feedback and any interesting topics or questions you want us to bring up in future episodes of Not So Serious. So thank you guys all for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
And and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Make sure to click that bell down below, turn post notifications on so you can keep updated on all our videos.
Follow us on all of our socials at Everything Astro Podcast.
All of our socials at Everything Astro Podcast. Twitter, Instagram, links down below.
All right.
Let us know if we can do better.
We'll make sure we have
Thank you for watching.
All right. We'll see you guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Cool.